All right, so we're going to get started in just a minute here. Again, today we're going to go over the financial training. We are recording today's webinar as we have recorded all of the webinars that we've done over the last few weeks. Once the video is converted, we will make it available in the FAQs section. It'll be closer to the top here under CampSite trainings. So we've already done phases 1 through 3. Those videos have been uploaded, replaced last year's video. So again, today we are going to do phase 4 financial. So as I mentioned, we are going to cover payment schedules, the financial tab of the family profile, invoicing and auto pay, financial reports, and financial settings. So not every portion of today's training is going to apply to everyone, just because obviously financials are pretty specific to setup and your program and your needs and things like that. And so not everything will be completely I guess, useful when it comes to your particular setup, things like that. But in general, today is going to cover all the different aspects of the financial training. So without further ado, first thing I'm going to go over is payment schedules. We touch upon payment schedules a little bit in our very first training, but in order to actually create a payment schedule, you want to go to admin here at the very top of the page. And then under campers and setup wizard, you want to go to step 4 payment schedules. The very first thing that you would want to create on step 4 is what we call a payment schedule group. The idea behind a payment schedule group is that it will allow you to create different payment plans or payment schedules that you can offer to parents based on the different programs that you might run throughout your database. A really common example, like we have in our training account, is that you have programs that take place at vastly different times of the calendar year. For instance, you have spring programs, fall programs, and summer programs. Because they take place at such different times of the year and may have different enrollment windows, you can also create different payment schedules and different payment schedule groups in order to apply to those specific programs. Another really popular method is if you have weekly payment schedules. So if you charge maybe the Monday before week 1 or the Friday before week 1 and the Friday before week 2 and so on and so forth, then you would create different payment schedule groups for each representative week that you have. Then every program that you have that takes place on that week can be associated with that specific payment schedule. So in order to create a different payment schedule group, you would select Add Payment Schedule Group. You just need to give it a unique name. Once you name it, then if you double click on the pencil icon, you can edit the name at any time. Also, once you create the group, in order to actually create payment schedules inside of it, you want to click on the name, and then that will bring you into where it says, in the page where you are allowed to create payment schedules. So the way that a payment schedule works in general is that it's going to take the family's remaining balance. So when I say remaining balance, I mean whatever's left over after they pay their deposit, if you have a deposit. So it'll take their remaining balance and divide it evenly over however many dates are on the payment schedule. So the more dates you have on a schedule, the smaller percentage of their balance they will pay per date. In order to create a payment schedule, you would simply select Add New Payment Schedule here at the top. And then the first thing that you want to do is you want to give it a name. The name will be displayed to parents during the checkout process. So just keep that in mind. Mainly what we find is that the name of payment schedules are typically how frequently you're going to invoice parents, or sometimes the day of the month in which you are going to invoice them. So in my training account, you'll notice that we have bi-monthly, monthly, I've seen weekly, bi-weekly, I've seen first of the month, 15th of the month, things like that. So obviously you can name it whatever you like, and it's not set in stone. You can always edit that later. Below that is the auto pay only setting. So auto pay refers to a batch processing where you are going to process everyone's credit card or ACH account all at the same time for whatever that family owes on that particular invoice date. When auto pay only is set to yes, what it means is that whoever selects this payment schedule is required to provide an electronic form of payment. Basically, they don't have an option. They are required to sign up for auto pay. So if this is set to no, then parents still have the opportunity to sign up for auto pay if they want to, but they are not required to. So below that is show on enrollment form. This is going to essentially be the active setting. So this will determine whether this schedule is actually presented to parents or not. Below that is where you can add your payment dates. So again, there's technically no limit to how many dates you can add. Just keep in mind, the more dates you add, the smaller percentage of their balance they'll pay per date. So let's say I have a 3-month payment schedule. Essentially, they would pay 33% of their balance on each payment date. If they sign up for a program after some of the initial dates have passed, then their balance will be recalculated over the remaining dates. So in this example, if a parent signs up on December 15th, for instance, then they would have to pay 50% of their balance on January 1st and the remaining 50% on February 1st. So again, it'll simply just recalculate even if they sign up after some of the initial dates have passed. The default settings of CampSite is that once the final date has passed on all of your active payment schedules, then enrollment will be considered pay in full at the time of enrollment. So there is a way to change that, which I will go over later in this training, but essentially most camps prefer it where as soon as the last date passes on the last active payment schedule, then enrollment will be pay in full. You have full range to edit the dates and delete them as needed, not only while you're creating the date, but also afterward as well, which is actually a newer feature for this year. So on the bottom of this window, you'll see that you have the ability to add instructions. Again, instructions will be presented to parents when they select the schedule during checkout. And you can type whatever you want here. What most camps will do is they might include the contact information for a specific financial person at their organization. So, or it might just be general instructions on how the payment schedule works or when they can expect payments to be taken out, things like that. So once you create the payment schedule, if you double click on the pencil icon here on the far left-hand side, then you can edit almost any of the settings that I just went over. So the name, auto pay, showing on the enrollment form, and the instructions, those can be updated at any time. When it comes to the dates themselves, you'll notice that, again, especially compared to last year or previous years, you have a lot more functionality when it comes to editing the dates of a payment schedule. So you'll notice at the very top that you have the ability to add what we call additional primary dates. So when you add a new primary date, what it means is that every single family who is associated with this payment schedule already, every single one of them will have that new date added to their schedule. So, and again, obviously adding a date will, like I said, decrease the percentage of their balance that they are expected to pay per invoice date. On the right-hand side, you'll notice that you also have the ability to delete payment schedule dates by double-clicking on the red circle. You can delete payment schedule dates as long as you have not run any of the steps of the invoicing process. So as long as you haven't at least generated the invoices, then you'll be able to delete a payment schedule date whenever you want. And then you'll notice there's a tiny little pencil icon next to each primary date. So if I double click on it, it allows me to change the date. Again, since it's a primary date, it'll change for every single family that is currently a part of this payment schedule. So there's no limit to how many payment schedules you can create within a payment schedule group, and technically speaking, no limit to how many payment schedule groups you can create within a year. Now, creating a payment schedule here on this page doesn't automatically mean that the schedule will be displayed to parents during enrollment. In order to make sure that the payment schedule is displayed to parents, you have to make sure that the payment schedule group is tied to a valid and active enrollment option on step 9. So in order to do that, you want to click Admin here at the top. And then again, under Campers Setup Wizard, you want to select step 9 Enrollment Options. And then next to the desired enrollment option, you double click on the 3 dots next to its name, and then you would select the Payment Schedule Group tab. From here, you can choose any of the payment schedule groups that exist on step 4 for the current year that you selected. The idea is that, again, as long as the parents pay something less than the full amount of which they owe, then they will be required to choose any active payment schedule within that group. As I mentioned, once all of the dates pass for a particular schedule or all of the schedules within a group, then the bundles will be considered pay in full at the time of enrollment, despite what the deposit might say. Right. So any questions on how to create payment schedules? If you're new to the webinar format, there should be a dashboard that allows you to submit questions in writing. So I do check that fairly frequently throughout the training, so feel free to dump questions in there as much as you want. I promise I will get to all of them as I'm going through the training. So great. So the next thing that we're going to go over is the financial tab of the family profile. So in my training account, I'm going to use the Paulson family. So in the middle of every family profile within your database, you will see the financial tab. Quite obviously, the financial tab is going to house all of the financial information for this particular family, and it's going to break it down on a per year basis. So the financial tab also has tabs of its own. The first one is transactions, and as I mentioned, they will be broken down on a per year basis. So the yearly dropdown will always default to whatever is set as the current year in your database. As you get more years in CampSite, you'll be able to go back to previous year's financial data for this family. Again, that information doesn't go anywhere. Below that is where you can enter financial notes for this family. Financial notes is similar to quick notes in that, again, it's strictly for internal use. Parents will never be able to see, edit, or contribute to this section whatsoever. But financial notes are also protected by financial permissions. So only the users and administrators that have financial permissions will be able to see or contribute to financial notes. Below that, on the left-hand side of the page, I have charges and discounts, and on the right-hand side of the page, I have payments, credits, and refunds. Those are the 5 transaction types that you will see throughout all of CampSite. The major difference between these two sets of transactions is that charges and discounts are made on a per camper basis, which is why it says for Jill Paulson. And then on the right-hand side, payments, credits, and refunds are made on a per family basis. Right. So now for Jill Paulson, this is a breakdown of her charges and or discounts. And all of these were added once Jill was approved for her enrollment requests. So technically these are based on selections that the parent made during the enrollment process. You'll notice since Jill Paulson is the only enrolled camper that her total charges are also the total charges for the family here on the right-hand side. So although these were all choices that were made by the parent, there will always be scenarios where you may need to make adjustments to a family's bill or add or delete charges and things like that. So in order to manually adjust charges, you want to select Add New Charge here on the bottom left-hand side. Before I get too far, I just want to make sure that everyone understands that when we use the terminology charge, we're not talking about any money actually being exchanged. We're simply just referring to adding a line item on the family's bill that they will be responsible for paying either now or at a future date. So again, adding a charge is just increasing their bill. So in order to add a manual charge, I want to select Add New Charge here in the bottom left-hand side, and I will be presented with this window here. So the first 2 fields, the date will always default to today, whatever that day is. Below that is the payment schedule. So if the family is on one payment schedule, then every single transaction that you create, it'll be assumed that you want to associate it with the one schedule that they're a part of. Vice versa, if the family is not on a payment schedule, then this field will automatically default to none since the family is not on a payment schedule. The only time that I would say you really have to pay attention to this field is when you allow parents or families to be on more than one payment schedule throughout the year. The way that families are allowed to be on more than one payment schedule throughout the year is if you have more than one payment schedule group and the family signs up for more than one program throughout the year. So just keep that in mind. Make sure that you are selecting the correct payment schedule when adding a manual charge or any manual transaction. And again, it will really mostly affect families who are on more than one schedule at a time. Below that is the camper. So when adding a manual charge, you want to select the correct camper on file. Keep in mind, again, you can choose any camper on file, even if they're not technically enrolled. Mainly, I point this out just to make sure that you do select the correct camper. Below that is where you can associate this charge with a specific session. So this deals with our accrual accounting, and we'll go over that a lot more in depth once we get to financial reports. But essentially, any charge or discount that exists within your database has to be assigned to at least one session. This is going to pull from the master list of sessions that you have on step 2 of your setup wizard. Obviously, the session should coincide with whatever session or sessions that the camper is attending. So I know that Jill Paulson is attending Camp Firewood All-Stars, so I am going to select that session. Now, some charges need to be allocated across every session that the camper is attending. That is possible, but in order to allocate it across multiple sessions, you have to create the charge first and then edit it accordingly later. So I will go over that in just a second. Okay. Below the session is the category. So this is going to pull from your master list of categories on step 3. So your choices will obviously look different from mine, but again, it'll pull from the transaction categories from your setup wizard. Below that is technically an optional description of the transaction, so you don't have to put anything here if you don't want to, but I highly recommend that you do, just because not only will it keep your records more complete, but in some financial reports, which we'll see later, you have the ability to search for a transaction based on a full or partial text description. So it is easier to find transactions if you have descriptions, and I would do your best to keep descriptions as uniform as possible, no matter who is creating manual transactions. So let's say this is a lunch charge. And then finally on the bottom is where you can add the charge either as a fixed dollar amount, or you can also use a percentage of their previous line items. Using a percentage for from previous line items is normally reserved for discounts, but I do find that some camps will use it for charges, especially if you want to include like a credit card fee or something like that. So I am going to add a lunch charge of $30. So once I've filled out all the necessary information in this window, I can submit my charge. The page will refresh, and you'll notice that the $30 was now added to Jill Paulson's total, and obviously their family balance also went up by $30 as well. Anytime that you want to learn more about a particular transaction, whether it's on the left or the right-hand side of the page, all you need to do is double click on the blue eye icon to the left of the transaction that you want to know more about. When you double click on the blue eye icon, again, in the top half of this window, you'll notice that it's pretty much all the fields that we just filled out when manually creating the charge. Now, although it's not obvious, there are certain fields in this top half of the window that are editable at any time. All you need to do is just double click on the text within that field in order to edit. So those fields include the payment schedule, the category, and the description. So at any time, you have the ability to edit those details whenever you want. Right? Below that is the session breakdown. So as I mentioned, when you first create a manual charge or discount, you can only assign that transaction to a single session. However, some charges and discounts need to be allocated across multiple sessions. I do find that in my camps, most charges and discounts are evenly distributed across all of the sessions that the camper is enrolling. Obviously, there are exceptions, like if it's a lunch for a specific week of camp, or an extra associated with a specific week of camp and things like that. Obvious exceptions, but I would say in general, most of the time, a charge or discount will be allocated evenly across all of the camper sessions. So for instance, I know that Jill, in addition to Camp Firewood All-Stars, is also attending week 1, and she's attending week 2. So maybe instead of the $30 being associated strictly with Camp Firewood All-Stars, I would want to spread the $30 across all 3 of her sessions. Right? So again, this session breakdown is editable at any time, and mostly it just affects your reporting purposes. So accrual accounting especially is to try to better track how much a particular week or session of camp should make when it is eventually paid in full. So it's not that it's not important, but it is one of those things that you are able to edit at any time, even if you get it kind of wrong, or again, when you first manually create it, you may not have all the details. You can always edit it later. Right? So now let's say that Jill Paulson changes her mind and she no longer wants lunch. In order to remove a charge or discount, or almost any transaction from the parent's balance, then on the bottom of this window, you'll notice you have the ability to reverse or delete the transaction. In most scenarios, I find that camps will typically reverse a transaction. When you reverse a transaction, the line item stays on this page. It's simply just struck through and grayed out. So reversing leaves a little bit more of a digital paper trail. When you delete a transaction, it's completely removed from this page. So the only place you'll see that it ever existed is the history tab of the family profile or in the deleted transactions report, which we'll see a little bit later. So again, regardless, whichever one you choose, you are going to confirm your choice here at the top, and then you would want to enter the reason for the reversal or the deletion. So in this, I'll just say that she changed her mind. Once I confirm, again, the page will refresh, and as I said, since I reversed it, the line item is still here, it's just struck through and it's grayed out. Reverse transactions do not show up on statements or invoices, so parents won't see this struck through line item or anything on their bill or their statement. Now, if I double click on the blue eye icon next to that reverse transaction, I can see all of the information I saw previously, as well as the timestamp in which it was reversed, who reversed the transaction, and the reason for the reversal. So let's say that Jill Paulson changes her mind yet again. You'll notice on the bottom of this page, I have, the bottom of the window, I have the ability to unreverse the transaction. So that'll just re-add the $30 back to their balance. So another reason why most camps do the reversal first is because you can always undo it later. And you can always delete it later if need be as well. Technically, there is no undelete button. Normally, it's not the end of the world. If you delete a transaction, you can simply just recreate it from scratch. But again, it's a little bit simpler to unreverse if necessary. Now you'll notice that some of her charges here on the left-hand side are highlighted in yellow, her spring break camp and her All-Star Week as well. The reason why you'll see transactions highlighted in yellow is it's the system indicating to you that that transaction is not associated with the payment schedule or one of the payment schedules that the family is currently on. So when you double click on the blue eye icon, you'll notice that under payment schedule, it will say none. Now, sometimes that's okay, right? Like spring break camp is a 1-week camp that is pay in full at the time of enrollment. So it makes sense that it's not a part of their payment schedule because it looks like they already paid for it. However, sometimes, and again, I would say the general rule of thumb for most camps is that almost all of the transactions associated with a family should be associated with at least one of the payment schedules that they are on. So in order to change that, again, you just double click on the blue eye icon in the new window that pops up. Sorry, a little bit of a delay. Might be having some technical difficulties. Bear with me real quick. There we go. Sorry about that. So, as I mentioned, in order to edit the payment schedule, you simply just double click where it says none for payment schedule, and then switch it to whatever payment schedule the family is currently on, or one of the schedules that they are currently on. Once you make that change and you refresh the page, now when I go back to financial, you'll see that that transaction is no longer highlighted in yellow. So again, it's not always a bad thing. It's just something that we want to notify you of in case you need to make that change. That's why it's highlighted in yellow instead of red. So now, next to new charge, we have new discount. New discount is going to work in the exact same steps as a new charge. It's just instead of increasing the family's balance, you are decreasing it on a per camper basis. So exact same fields, exact same steps. It's just decreasing the balance instead of increasing it. On the right-hand side of the page, we have payments, credits, and refunds. So again, through the parent dashboard, parents are able to submit payments on their own. Also, obviously, if they're signed up for auto pay for a payment schedule, they should have their payments taken out when you do the invoicing and auto pay process. However, just like with charges and discounts, there will always be moments where you may need to manually record a payment on a family's profile. So in order to do so, you would select Add New Payment here on the right-hand side. When you add a new payment, again, the first two fields are ones that you've seen already. So the date field will always default to today, and the payment schedule will default to whichever, again, payment schedule they're on, or again, you may need to pay attention and select the appropriate payment schedule. What's nice about the payment schedule here is that it does show the balance that is specific to that payment schedule. So you'll notice that it says 1730 for the bi-monthly plan, even though the Paulson's total balance is 1880. That's because the All-Star Summer Camp program for $150 is not associated with that schedule, as we can tell because it's highlighted in yellow. So that's why the balance is a little different. That's totally normal. Just depends on, again, if you have transactions that are associated with the schedule or not. So below that is the payment method in which you will collect payment. So if you choose an electronic form of payment, like credit card or ACH, keep in mind that that payment method must already be on file. Right? If it's not on file, but you have it in hand, then you do have the ability to add it to the additional tabs here under the financial tab. And I'll go over both of those in just a second. So you also have the ability to choose non-electronic forms of payment, which, to be fair, is more common when manually adding a payment on a family's profile. So if you select check, you have to enter the check number and the amount of the payment, or you can create it as any other custom payment methods within your database. This might include cash, or I've seen money order, wire transfer, PayPal, things like that. Again, a little later in the training, I'll go over how to create custom payment methods in your database. In mine, we just have one, which we call other. Right? So let's say the Paulsons sent me a check. Let's say they sent me a check for $100. Right? Once I enter the full amount of the payment, the next section is the category breakdown. What this allows me to do is allocate the total amount of the payment towards as many different transaction categories as are necessary. When I say as are necessary, it's because in, I would say, easily 98% of scenarios where you are adding a payment, the category of the payment should coincide with the category of the camper's charges. So looking at Jill Paulson's line item summary, she has charges in summer camp, school break, and tuition, right? So if that's the case, it doesn't make sense for me to put $100 towards the after school category because none of her charges have anything to do with the after school category, right? So if I wanted to, I could put all 100 towards summer camp. That's fine. I know they owe at least $100 for that category. Or maybe I want to break it up a little bit. So maybe I'll do 75 for summer camp and 25 for school break. Right. Again, technically speaking, I can allocate it towards as many different categories as I need to. The most important part is that on the bottom right-hand side, the amount remaining zeroes out and turns green, indicating that you have allocated the full amount of the payment. Right. So again, depending on your setup and depending on the charges of the camper, you might be allocating towards just a single category, which would obviously be the full amount of the payment, or you might be dividing it up across categories, again, just depending on their setup, your setup, and the camper's charges. So in the category breakdown, there is there's a field where you can add a description of the transaction. I do recommend filling this out. However, I'm going to be a little bit of a hypocrite and skip it for now. So as I scroll down, the next section is the invoice breakdown. Again, this allows you to allocate the full amount of the payment towards any open invoices or any past due invoices that they might have. Now, I am going to apologize because the dates on here are quite old. We didn't quite keep up with doing our invoicing and auto pay process, but I can tell that none of these invoices have been generated because they continue to show up on this page, and the amount remaining, or the amount due for each date, is $0. So this is not common to have 8 dates spanning over a year that have not been generated. Mostly it's more like the most recent date may have been generated and they still owe money for it, something like that. So now, again, if I were trying to allocate $100 towards 12/1, I would get an error message because, again, technically they don't owe anything towards the 12/1/2020 invoice date. Again, the reason for that is because it was never generated. So, like I said, internally, not a great way to function the invoicing and auto pay process. But the point being, if I wanted to add this payment, I would need to put it towards no invoice for this particular family. Again, most of the time you do want to allocate it towards an open invoice, but again, in order to do so, the amount due must be greater than $0. Now, what's going to happen when I submit this is that their payment schedule balance is going to drop down to 1630. And what will happen is once I do actually generate these dates, then it will just divide 1630 over the remaining dates of their schedule. That's how it'll work. So it's still chipping away at their balance. It's just not tied to a particular invoice date. Right? Again, honestly, the most important part of this section is that the amount remaining zeroes out and turns green over here on the right-hand side. So once the category breakdown and the invoice breakdown have been completed, you have the ability to submit the payment. You'll also notice on the bottom here that you have the ability to send an updated statement to P1, P2, or both, and it will include the payment that you are creating right here and now. Also keep in mind that if you select an electronic form of payment like credit card or checking account, when you click submit, that is when money is actually exchanged, right? So when I click submit, the page will refresh. And as I scroll down, you'll notice that the check payment that I just added was actually added on 2 different lines or 2 different rows of their total. The reason for that is because for all non-electronic forms of payment, when you allocate it towards multiple categories, it will create a row or line item for each category that you allocated it towards. The reason for that is because we don't have a way to verify that this check, we can't verify with the third party the accuracy of this check. I understand that you entered a check number when creating the transaction, and it will match, but technically the check number is just an arbitrary number that an administrator entered when they created this payment. There's no way for the system to verify whether that is accurate or not. So because of that, just in case, we create a line item for every separate category that you allocated a non-electronic payment toward. For electronic payments, like this MasterCard here for 150, it doesn't matter how many payments it's spread across, how many categories it's spread across, it will always appear as a single row or line item. The reason why we're able to do that is because if you double click on the blue eye icon, you'll notice in this new window that we have this payment gateway ID number. This is a unique number that we can verify with your gateway to, again, sort of clarify or confirm that no matter how many categories it's spread across, again, it's always a part of this singular transaction associated with this very unique number that we can pull from a third party, right? When you double click on the blue eye icon of an electronic payment, you'll notice on the bottom there are some similar selections as a charge or discount, but there are some unique ones as well. So let's say that this payment was made by mistake. And you need to remove it from the family's balance. We found that a lot of camps try to reverse or delete a transaction in order for an electronic payment to stop being processed, right? But reversing and deleting a electronic transaction does not stop the funds from actually being processed. What you need to do instead is process a void. So this year, we actually added a new button, new functionality, where you are able to void a transaction here on the bottom, right? So voiding a transaction will stop the funds from being processed, and it'll look like the transaction never happened, right? So if you process it on the wrong credit card or you process it for the wrong amount, instead of reversing or deleting, you would want to avoid the transaction. Now, there are some rules when it comes to voids. Voids can only be performed on the same day that the transaction was created, and it has to be voided before 10 p.m. Eastern. Our payment gateway, Constellation Payments, settles all of our transactions by 10 p.m. Eastern, so it has to be before then. We added this because previously you had to contact support in order to void a transaction, but it limited the amount of voids and things that we could do on the weekends and our off hours and stuff like that. So now users have the ability to void transactions on their own. Keep in mind that you should only see this button again if your payment gateway is Constellation Payments. If your payment gateway is authorized.net, you don't have the ability to void through the database, you would need to contact authorize.net directly in order to void a transaction. They, I believe, have similar rules to us, where it can only be done on the same day and it has to be before a certain time. I don't know when exactly. So again, if you're on authorize.net, you would want to contact them to make sure, right? Now, you'll also notice on the bottom that you have the ability to refund the full amount of the existing payment. If that's your intention, then it's very easy. You simply just click refund on that button, and then it'll refund the full amount back to the original payment method. However, I find that most camps are not refunding full amounts. Instead, they are refunding partial amounts. So in order to refund a partial amount, you want to select Add New Refund here on the bottom right-hand side. When you select Add a New Refund, you'll notice that it is the exact same steps as adding a new payment. It's just instead of receiving money from the parents, you are returning money to the parents, right? If you choose an electronic method to return the payment, like a credit card, then you want to keep in mind that refunds take about 7 to 10 business days for the refund to return to their account. If you are trying to refund an ACH payment, those have different rules, and ACH payments can only be refunded in full of an existing payment. You don't have the ability to refund partial amounts for ACH within the system, right? So the last transaction here on the bottom is the ability to add a new credit. We've already seen every single one of these fields before, so all of them are necessary. Basically, what a credit does is it decreases the family's balance by whatever dollar amount you enter into this field. So the most common way that I see credits used is if a family may be overpaid in the previous year and you want to apply their credit to the following year. So you basically take their negative balance from the previous year and add a credit into the current year, and it will just decrease their balance by that amount. So before 2020, credits were the least utilized transaction type of all, but within the last year or so, they've become certainly more popular, unfortunately. So on the right-hand side, we have this box, which I've referenced a couple times. So this will show you the total charges. So for every camper on the profile who's enrolled, minus the total payments to give you the family's total current balance. On the bottom of this little window, you'll see two icons. If you double click on the $ icon, what it does is it generates the family's most up-to-date financial statement, right? So let me increase that a little bit. So your statements will look extremely similar. It will say statement in the top right-hand corner. The date will be the date in which you generated the statement. On the left, we'll have your logo and your camp's information. Below that will be the specific family information, and below that a breakdown of every single one of their transactions to give you their total current balance. You also have the ability to include any sort of custom language on any on any statement. I'll show you how to do that a little bit later when we jump into financial settings. So your statements will look extremely similar. Obviously, the logo and whatnot will be specific to your camp. So if you double click on the envelope icon, you have the ability to email a statement to any of the parents on file. So you'll notice that you don't have the same customization options. You don't have the ability to add merge fields or anything like that in this window. So if you wanted to send them a more personalized email with a statement attached, you can select the action menu and you would select send an email. When you do that, again, you can either type the email from scratch or load a previously saved email. Above the body, you'll notice a section where you can attach a statement from any year of your database. Again, it will always show the most up-to-date information, financial information for the year that you select. Right? So, any questions on the financial tab of the transactions tab before I move on to invoices? All right, so the next tab is Invoices. Invoices is going to house the payment schedule information for this particular family. So again, this will be broken down on a per year basis. And below that is where you will see the payment schedule table, obviously based on whatever payment schedule the family is on. If the family is not on a payment schedule, you do have the ability to add a payment schedule to them by selecting Add Payment Schedule. So you would choose the group, and then once you choose the group, you would choose the schedule within that group. Right. Below that is where where we list the payment schedule group name as well as the specific payment schedule that the family is currently on for that year. Next to that, again, you'll see two little icons. The first one looks like a little dollar sign. If you double click on that, it generates a statement that is specific to that payment schedule. So again, there is a family statement, which will include every transaction and their total balance, and then there is a payment schedule statement. The only time that the balance will be different is if you have transactions that are not associated with the payment schedule. Yeah, that is the only scenario where the balance really should be different, is if they have transactions not associated with the schedule. Other than that, the family statement and the schedule statement should be the same. So again, the reason why the Paulsons are different is because we still have that $150 that is not tied to the schedule that they're on. Right. If you want to change what schedule they're on within the same payment schedule group, you would want to double click on the little wrench icon, and then that will allow you to change what payment schedule they are on, or you can remove them from their current payment schedule entirely. Below that is the invoice table. So um, you, again, on an individual family basis, you have the ability to change the dates of their payment schedule. So you can add new invoice dates, you can delete invoice dates, and you can sort of tailor a payment schedule specifically to this individual family if you want. We call those changes off schedule or other invoice dates. So for instance, let's say I add a date for November 15th. It'll automatically be added into the table, but you'll notice that the invoice ID number column has this little star icon into it. So what the star icon indicates is that this is, again, an off schedule or an other payment schedule date. So this might be specific to the Paulsons, or it might be specific to just a small number of families, right? If you double click on the pencil icon here on the far left, you have the ability to update their auto pay status at any time. And again, that is on a uh, per invoice date basis. If you double click on the envelope icon, you can generate and email the invoice to the family. Now, most of the time, you are going to be generating and emailing invoices in mass for every single person who's a part of a payment schedule, not for an individual family. But just in case, for whatever reason, you needed to do that, you can do it through their family profile. One benefit of doing this is that you can see the invoice amount here on the bottom. So it will tell you essentially what their next invoice will be. And again, CampSite will take the remaining balance and divide it evenly over however many dates are on their schedule. Right. So to kind of show you what it looks like when an invoice date is generated, I will generate that off schedule one that I just added. So when an invoice date is generated, then under the generated column, it'll change from a red no to the green date in which that was completed. It will also fill out the rest of the table. So the amount of that invoice, the amount paid towards that invoice, and then the amount due still for that invoice. Right. Now that I have generated that invoice, you'll notice there's now a $ icon next to the envelope. So if I double click on that, what it does is it generates a PDF copy of their invoice. Now, invoices and statements look extremely similar, so it is important to note the difference. It'll say invoice on the top instead of statement. The date will be the date in which their payment is due for this invoice, not the date in which you generated it. And it will have an invoice number here on the top. As I scroll down, not only does it still break down the transactions, but it'll also have what it says, the total due now. So when it says total due now, what we mean is the total due at the date at the top of the invoice. So again, an invoice will serve as their bill, whereas a statement will serve as sort of a summary of their financial situation, right? Also, for non-auto pay families, there is a second page, which is a detach and remit payment section. This is also what we refer to as the payment coupon, sometimes throughout CampSite. So again, this will only appear for non-auto pay families, and you don't have to include it if you don't want to, which I'll show you how to not include it when we get to the invoicing and auto pay process. Right. So again, you have full range to make any sort of changes that you want to the invoice and the payment schedule on a per family basis. Like I said, sometimes you may have a family that needs a little bit more help financially, or they request extending a payment schedule and it's not something that you want to do for everyone, then you can make adjustments to their schedule for just this individual family, right? Keep in mind too, if you delete invoice dates, again, if you lower the amount of days that they have remaining, again, now when I double click on the envelope icon, you'll notice that the amount changed. It's not 203 anymore, it's 237. And that's because I deleted a date. Right. So on the bottom, you can set the invoice preferences for the parents. So this is basically just deciding which parent is receiving the invoices when you send them in mass. By default, P1 should always be set to yes, but you can also change this as needed by double clicking in order to edit. Parents can also edit this information through the parent dashboard if you allow them to, right? Which I'll go over in financial settings. The last two tabs for the financial tab is the credit cards. Credit cards is going to house all of the saved payment information that the parents have on file. Technically speaking, they can add as many payment methods as they want. And again, this is something that they can do through the parent dashboard, so you don't have to do it for them. But as an administrator, if maybe the parent is in office and you want to add their credit card to their account, you can do so by selecting Add Credit Card. When you select Add Credit Card, you are presented with this window here, and every single field in this window is mandatory in order to add a new credit card. This is also the only place where you will ever see the full 16 digits of the credit card number. Once you select Add Credit Card, you will only have access to the last 4 digits. That is the same for everyone, including my team, again, our tech support or dev team. None of us have access to the full credit card number once you add it into the system. You'll only ever be able to see the last 4 digits. Right? Once a credit card is added, if you need to edit any of the details, you can double click on the pencil icon here on the left-hand side, and you can edit any of the details. Mostly camps need to edit the expiration date. You don't have the ability to edit the card number. Again, that would defeat the security purpose. So if you suspect that there is an issue with the card number, then what you would need to do is delete the card from their profile, and then either you or the parent can re-add it to their account. Speaking of deleting, administrators are the only ones who have the ability to delete a credit card from a family's profile. Parents do not have the ability to remove their own credit cards from their own file. The reason for that is because we used to allow them to do that, and then we found that some families would avoid auto pay payments by deleting their credit card just before a payment was supposed to come out. So we'd rather that you get a decline notification as opposed to just wondering why there was no transaction whatsoever and why they have no credit card on file. So credit cards can only be removed by admins here on the back end. If the family has more than one credit card on file, they need to choose which one is considered the primary. Not only is this a way for them to indicate that's the card that you should use when processing any sort of payments, but it's also a way for them to indicate which card is a part of the auto pay process. So if I go back to invoices, you'll notice on the right-hand side where it says auto pay, it just says credit card. Well, the way that the system knows which credit card to choose is because it's marked as the primary card. So that's why there's the primary. If you need to switch that at any time, just double click on the gray circle and then it will turn green, indicating that that card is now the primary. Next to credit cards, we have checking accounts. Checking accounts is almost exactly the same as credit cards. It's just that you are adding checking account information. Not all camps will have the ability to process ACH payments. If you're curious about processing ACH payments, you would want to contact your gateway, and that is something that we can turn on once the proper application is filled out. So if you do have ACH payments, again, it's pretty much the same process. You enter the routing number. This is the only time you'll see the full account number of their checking or savings account, and then you just want to enter the banking information. Once you add the checking account info, again, you'll only ever see the last 4 digits of the account number, and that cannot be edited. So if you suspect it's wrong, again, you have to delete it and then start all over. And then in order to edit any of the other details, you simply just double click on the text themselves underneath the columns. So any questions on any of the information that I covered under the financial tab of the family profile before I move on to invoicing and auto pay? All right, so next thing we're going to go over is the invoicing and auto pay process. In order to get there, I want to click Financial here in the top navigation bar. And then on the left-hand side, under Camper Financial Tools, I want to select Invoicing and Auto Pay. This will bring me to a page that looks very similar to step 4 of the setup wizard, where we list every single payment schedule group that you have broken down on a per year basis. Once I click into the payment schedule group, again, it's going to display the payment schedules that are within it, and I can start the invoicing and auto pay process. So we split our invoicing and auto pay process into 3 steps. The first step is to generate the invoices, which basically means that you are locking in an amount that each family will owe on that date. You can send the invoices to the family, which is how you notify them of what they owe for that date. And then you would want to run auto pay. Auto pay is the only step in the process where money is actually exchanged. And to be fair, auto pay is a bit of a misleading term. No payment within CampSite was ever really truly automatic. To parents, it seems automatic because there's nothing additional for them to do. But for everyone else, for admins, it has to be manually initiated by an administrator here on the back end. So in order to start this process, I just want to select Run Now under Invoices Generated. Now, the general rule of thumb with this process is that invoices generated, or generating the invoice and sending the invoice, should be done on the same day. It should be done back to back. And what we tend to find is that most camps will do this about 7 to 14 days or a week or two before the actual invoice date. The reason for that, again, is because invoices serve as their bill, and no one likes to receive a bill the day before it's due. So, as a courtesy, a lot of camps will generate their invoices and send them to parents about a week or two before the actual due date. Autopay tends to be the only step that is run on or after the invoice date. Funny thing we've noticed about parents is that they don't seem to care if you charge them a day or two after you said that you would, but if you try to do it even a minute early, they will notice. So autopay, only step that is run on or after the invoice date. Right. Actually going to delete that real quick. So, oh, I think I accidentally broke it. Let me move on to monthly. I apologize. So, again, in order to start this process, you just want to select Run Now. When you select Run Now, it is going to bring you into a separate payage. And the first thing that it's going to do is double check. It's going to have this checklist here at the top. So it is going to double check that all families on this payment schedule have a balance for 2021. If that's true, it'll give you the little green OK. If that's not true, it'll give you this red no, and it will tell you which families don't have a balance. So the reason why we have this is because technically speaking, it is possible for a family to sign up for a payment schedule and then pay their full balance before the schedule is over. It is possible, but it is not common. So just in case, we want to make sure that, again, you're not going to send a bill for $0 to the family. It's not the end of the world, but it does cause confusion. And in order to cut down how many calls and emails you get from parents, you may as well remove all families that don't have a balance, which I'll show you how to do in just a second. Below that is where we have invoice settings. The first one is where you can set all invoice amounts to either the same fixed dollar amount or the same percentage of their balance. This isn't utilized too frequently, Again, most of the time, CampSite will calculate the balance for the family. And again, most of the time it's going to be the same for all families, especially if you have the same enrollment window. But the only time I've ever really seen this be used is I have a camp in, I believe, upstate New York, that they have a three-date payment schedule. And what they do is they charge $1,000 on the first date, $1,000 on the second date, and then whatever the family owes after that will be due on the third date. It's just kind of the way they've always done the way that they do their invoicing. So what they do is they have everyone fixed amount set to $1,000 for the first 2 dates, and then it's whatever the family owes after that for that third and final date. So again, not super common, but something that you can change for everyone on this schedule. Below that is the installment fee. So an installment fee is a small additional charge that you can add on top of whatever the family owes that will also be due on this date, right? So the way I've seen this used is I have a camp that has I think it's an 8-month payment schedule, and which is longer than most camps. And so what they do is they add a small $10 installment fee per invoice date. So they use it sort of as an incentive, as well, if you pay in full the time of enrollment, you can save yourself $80. But for the convenience of allowing you to pay over such a long period of time, we're going to charge you $10 per invoice. So again, an installment fee is just a small amount added to their total that will also be due on this day. Right. Below that is a list of every single family on this payment schedule. You have the ability to get a preview of every family's invoice. You can also see individual invoices by double-clicking on the $ next to their last name. And most importantly, you can remove all $0 invoices from this batch. Again, every time that you run this step, you want to make sure that you are removing all $0 invoices from this batch. Again, it's not the end of the world. It's just cuts down on the amount of confusion because you are only sending invoices to people who actually owe you money, which is important. So also, you'll notice that you do have the ability to change the amount that you are locking in for a family that will be due on this day. So again, CampSite is going to automatically calculate it based on their balance, as well as how many dates are on this schedule, but you do have the ability to change it if you want to on an individual family basis. Again, it's not common, but you can do so if you want to. If you change the invoice amount here, it will simply just readjust or recalculate how much they owe on the remaining dates. Right? So now that I've double checked my checklist and I have removed those $0 invoices from this batch, I will scroll down to the bottom and I will click Generate Invoices. When I click Generate Invoices, it's going to confirm my choice. Once I confirm, depending on how many families I have, it might take a few seconds. But then once it's done, it will bring me back to the payment schedule page, and you'll notice that the command moved from invoices generated to now where I can send the invoices. So like I said, typically you're generating the invoice and sending them back to back on the same day. So in order to do that, I just want to click Send Now. And again, the first thing that it's going to double check at the top is that all families have at least one recipient with an email designated to receive the invoice. Basically, it's just confirming that every family has one person that has indicated they are going to receive the invoice. If that's true, it'll give you this little green OK, just like it does in my database. In order to email the families their invoices, you have to attach them to a saved family level email. If you don't have one created already, you would select Create a new saved family email here on the right. In my database, we do have one called Invoice. So below that is where you can verify the footer on autopay and non-autopay invoices. This is generic language that will pre-populate into this section every single time you run this step. The only thing that updates automatically is the date field, as it will always coincide with the date of the invoice. Now, technically speaking, you do have the ability to make changes to this footer. You can edit the language, add additional language, whatever you want. Just keep in mind that whatever changes you make, they will not be saved for the next invoice date. Again, the only thing that will populate is this generic language that pre-populates every single time you run this step, right? Below that, you'll notice a little checkbox where you have the ability to include or not include the detach and remit payment section at the bottom of non-auto pay invoices. So again, this should only affect families that are not on auto pay. And then below that is just a simple list of every single person that you are about to email for their invoices. This should be the exact same list that you saw on the generate invoices step previously. So once I've double checked my checklist and I've selected my saved email, I want to scroll all the way down to the bottom and click send invoices. Again, this will confirm my choice. And again, depending on how many families I have, it might take a few seconds, but once it's done, it will put me back onto the payment schedule page. And again, the command will move over to the last step of the process, right? So now I have the ability to run auto pay. As a reminder, auto pay should only be run on or after the invoice date because it's the only one where you are actually processing payments. So when I click run now, it's going to bring me to a page which will show me every single family currently on auto pay. Again, at the top, you'll see a list, a series of checklists. So it will double check that all credit card families have a primary card designated. Same thing with checking accounts. All credit cards have an unexpired expiration date to cut down on the amount of declines you're going to get. And then one last time, again, we make sure that all families still have a balance for 2021 or the current year. We do that because, again, if you send an invoice 2 weeks before it's due, then technically speaking, it is possible for the parents to go in and submit a payment before the due date. Doesn't happen frequently, but it is possible, and therefore we want to make sure that you are not overcharging them for something that they've already paid. Right? So below will be the list of families on AutoPay listed in alphabetical order. Typically you'll have more than 2 families, but in my training account, I just have these 2 for this schedule. It will break down the payment method that you're about to process, the invoice amount that is due on this day, any past due amounts that they may have from previous invoices, and then the amount that you are about to process. We give you one last opportunity to edit the amount that you are about to process on their payment method. The reason for that is because technically this amount is the sum of their invoice amount and any past due amounts. So we do automatically add in any past due amounts to their current amount, and the hope is that it will make them current, right? So we're trying to automatically get past due amounts that they may have. The hope is also that if they're on auto pay, they don't have any past due amounts because hopefully their payment method on file is valid and you are receiving payments normally. So, but again, still, we give you one last opportunity to change the amount that you are about to process. Once you have double checked all your checklists and you have verified the amounts that you want to process, in order to actually charge their credit cards, you would want to select Run Auto Pay. So once I do that, again, I would just confirm my choice here at the top. Again, it might take a few seconds depending on the number of families, but now what it's going to do is it's going to bring me to a results page. So in semi-real time, it is going to show me if the parents have been approved, declined, or there was an error, right? Now, since I only have 2 families, I heard back from my gateway pretty immediately. Both of these families were declined, which doesn't shock me. Both of these are fake families with fake credit cards, so hence why they were declined. But if you have a large list of families, under the result column, you'll notice that instead of saying approved, declined, or error, it will say processing or not yet run. The reason for that is because, again, if you have a large number of families, we don't instantaneously hear back from the gateway, making sure that that they were approved or not. Again, there's a slight delay depending on how many families you have in the auto pay process. So if the result says processing or not yet run, then on the left-hand side above the results, you can click refresh. When you refresh the results, it should change from processing to approved, declined, or an error. If you keep clicking refresh and the result continues to say processing or not yet run, let us know and we can either look into it or we can contact the gateway and figure out what's going on with that transaction. Also, if the result is declined or error, you'll notice on the right-hand side, it will tell you why it was declined or there was an error, right? By default, the settings in CampSite have it so that if a family is declined, they are notified that they were declined, just so you know. If you need to access this page at any time, if you go back to the payment schedule page, you'll notice that as I scroll down, there is now a results link underneath the auto pay column. and the command moves over to the next date in line. So the process will start all over again. And again, it's always those 3 steps. Right. So any questions on the invoicing and auto pay process before I move on to financial reports? All right, so in order to access financial reports, I want to select financial here in the top navigation bar. And again, that will bring me back to the financial dashboard. We split our reports into 3 different sections: camper reports, reconciliation reports, and payment gateway reports. Keep in mind that if you have the events module, or if you have conference and retreat, or you have the donations and extended payments module, your financial dashboard will look slightly different. But all of the reports are based on each other. So essentially, all of the reports in the camper module are the same that will be in events, conference and retreat, and donations. You won't have the same extent, but they're all based, again, on the same foundation. So to start, under camper reports, our very first report is the camper transaction summary. This is one of the more broad reports we have within the database because it allows you to search by transaction, and it'll break those transaction down by every category in your database. So you can search by year, by month, and by a specific date range. When you run this report, as I mentioned, it breaks down every single transaction type by every single category in your database to give you totals in each row and each column. The purpose of this report is that by the end of your season, the hope is that this bottom right-hand number should be as close to 0 as possible. So this bottom right-hand number essentially gives you an idea of how much is still owed to your camp. If it's a positive amount, that's how much you still need to collect. If it's a negative amount, it's actually what you owe to families. So again, we wanted to get it as close to 0 as possible. On the far left-hand side above your results, you'll see 2 icons. So you have the ability to print this report and you can export it to Excel at any time. I'm not going to point it out in every report, but I promise every report that we're about to look at, you will see these 2 icons to the left above your results. So you do have the ability to print or export any piece of financial data that you can report on through through the financial reports. Right. So back to financial at the top. The next report is the family summary. This is one of the more popular ones because it allows you to search by balance broken down on a per family basis. So when I go into this report, I can search by year, by balance type, balance range, payment schedule, and by date range. So the way that I most commonly see this report used is, again, let's say you're getting close to the end of your season and you want to report on families who still owe you money. Those would be families who have a positive balance. So what camps will do is they'll uncheck where it says 0 or negative, and then they will run the report and it will display every single family for the year that still has a positive balance. So it'll break the families down alphabetically by last name. It will show you the names of all of the campers on that profile who are enrolled for the year. It will show you the sessions that they're enrolled in. It will break down every single transaction type on their profile, as well as their total current balance, the date of their last payment, if applicable, and then the payment schedule that they're a part of, if applicable. One benefit to this report is on the far left-hand side. Not only can you print and export to Excel, but if you double-click on the envelope icon, you can also mass email all of the families on this report, giving them a friendly or maybe not so friendly reminder that they can submit a payment for their balance through the parent dashboard. The next report, actually the next 3 reports, all deal with our accrual accounting. So as I mentioned before, accrual accounting allows you to better track how much a particular session or week of camp should make when it is eventually paid in full. So the first one is the camper accrual transaction log. This is one of the more specific or detailed reports that we have within the database. When you jump into an accrual report, you'll notice that the only transaction types are charges, discounts, and reversals of charges and discounts. That is on purpose. So anytime you see the word accrual, you are only dealing with charges, discounts, and reversals of charges and discounts. So you can search by transaction type, by category, by the specific session in your database, a full or partial text description, transaction range, and date range. When you run this report, again, it gives you a very detailed line-by-line breakdown of every single transaction that fits the criteria above. It will include specific transaction information like when it was created, who it was created by, the family and camper it's associated with, and then all of the transactional information that we've seen previously. Next is the camper accrual summary by session. This is very similar to that first report that we saw, because not only does it break it down by category and transaction, but it also breaks it down by the individual session themselves. So when you come into this report, you can search by year, by transaction type, by session, and then by a date range. So when I run this report, what it does is it breaks down all of the charges, discounts, and reversals of charges and discounts by every single category in your database and by every session that you chose above. So now the purpose of this report is that this bottom right-hand number should tell you how much a particular session of camp should make when it is eventually paid in full. Again, this is essentially the total amount that you are billing your families to attend this particular session. This is your net charges for that session, right? So the idea is that what you charge families for a session and what they pay you should be equal. So this will tell you, or at least give you an idea of how much a particular session or week of camp should make when it is eventually paid in full. Right? The next report is almost exactly the same. It's just that instead of breaking it down by individual sessions, we break it down by what we call accrual periods. An accrual period is something that you create, and what it does is it's actually a group of sessions that you can tie together so that you can see what that group of sessions should make when it is eventually paid in full. In order to create an accrual period, you'll see on the left-hand side of the page under Camper Financial Tools, accrual periods. So again, accrual periods are going to be broken down on a per year basis, and you have full flexibility to create and edit accrual periods as needed. We find that there are essentially two kind of schools of thought when it comes to creating accrual periods. Camps will do it based on when sessions take place. So sometimes, especially for camps that run all year round, they might do quarterly breakdowns like we did. So Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4. Another school of thought, which I think maybe we did a couple years ago, is more by a program. So it doesn't matter when the session takes place. If it's associated with summer camp, then it's all a part of that one period. If it's all a part of the after school program, whether it's fall or spring, again, it's all a part of the school period. So typically we find, again, it's either broken down by time period, so like quarters or months, or it's broken down by program, regardless of when it actually takes place. In order to create a new accrual period, you would just select Add New Accrual Period, and then you would give it a unique name. As you'll notice, you can only create as many accrual periods as you have sessions for the year. So once you assign all of your sessions to accrual periods, you can't create a brand new accrual period unless you start removing sessions from your existing accrual periods. So in order to edit the sessions or the name of an accrual period, you can double click on the pencil icon here on the left, and you can edit the name and you can remove the sessions that are a part of that period at any time, right? So once you start removing sessions from a period, then you can add it to a new one or to an existing one as needed. You can also delete a accrual period at any time. It doesn't do anything to the sessions themselves. Again, it just removes them from that period since the period will no longer exist. Right? So to use this report, now if I go into the camper accrual summary by accrual period, again, I can search by transaction type, by accrual period, and by date range. Now when I run this report, again, it gives me a breakdown of all my charges, discounts, and reversals by every single category, but now it's breaking it down by every session that is a part of that accrual period. So the idea is that this bottom right-hand number should tell me how much I should be making or how much I can expect to make when all of my Q1 sessions are paid in full. Again, here's Q2 and Q3 and Q4, right? So again, in my database, we did it by quarters, but you don't have to do it that way. You can create any sort of method for accrual periods as you want. The idea is that you're just grouping the sessions together so that you can see what group of sessions, how much those group of sessions should make when eventually paid in full. Next, we have the camper past due report. This will allow you to do exactly what it sounds like, find any families that are considered past due based on the payment schedule that they are a part of. So when you jump into this report, you can search by session, by payment schedule, by the age of the past due amount, and then by the amount range. When I run this report, what it's going to do is just going to break down all of the families with a past due balance. It will list them in alphabetical order by name. It will tell you the payment schedule that they're a part of, if they have any current balances, the, again, age breakdown of their past due balances, the invoice date that is considered past due, and their total current balance. In this report, on the left-hand side above the results, not only can you print and export to Excel, but if you double-click on the envelope icon, you can resend them their invoices that have already been generated as kind of a reminder that they owe that money. Or you can generate a zip file, which will include a PDF of every single family's invoice. That way, if you wanted to maybe physically hand it to them or physically mail it to them, then you can do so. So next is reconciliation reports. The first one is the transaction log. The transaction log is probably the most detailed, most specific report that we have for our finances. So the transaction log allows you to search by transaction type. Note that you can search any transaction type, including payments, credits, and refunds. So you can search by payment method, by transaction category, by the payment schedule, the date range, transaction range, and a full or partial text description. So when you run this report, again, it will just be a very detailed breakdown of line by line transactions that fit the criteria above, right? So very similar to the accrual transaction log, but this will include all transaction types. Below that is another popular report, which is our deposit report. The deposit report specifically tracks payments. No other transaction type is associated with the deposit report, but payments are obviously the most important since that is what you are receiving from your parents or your families. So in this report is unique because it allows you to search across multiple years at the same time. You can search by payment method. You can search by date range, although it'll always default to today, whatever that day is. You can combine electronic payments and checks, and you can include payments that were later reversed. When combining electronic payments and checks, what that means is that no matter how many categories it's spread across, again, it will always appear as a single row or line item. So when you run this report, I only did today's date, right? So it's going to break down all of my payments that I've received today, first by payment method, then by transaction category, and then by the individual transactions themselves, right? Now, again, we call this a reconciliation report because the purpose is to reconcile what has been deposited into your bank versus what CampSite says should have been deposited. However, the rule of thumb that we try to give all of our camps is that if the amounts are off, don't immediately freak out. There's normally a very good reason. Depending on when the transaction was initiated, sometimes the bank might be a little bit delayed. Or if you have non-electronic payments, maybe they weren't brought to the bank yet, like a check, something like that. So there's almost always a reasonable explanation for why the deposit amounts might be off. The point is to try to find those amounts that might be off. Again, don't immediately assume that something is horribly, horribly wrong. There's normally a very good reason for it. So next is the CSI Gateway report. The CSI Gateway report will only work for our camps who are on Constellation Payments. If you are on authorized.net, you won't see this report in your database. The purpose of this report is to be able to communicate directly with our CSI Gateway. I believe we're still having some technical difficulties with this report, so I apologize if this doesn't work. But when running the report, you can report on the transaction date, settlement date, and then the different transaction types. Constellation does have different terminology for their transactions, but the major ones are a sale is considered a payment within CampSite, and then a refund is going to be exactly the same. The other ones are a little bit more detailed. If you ever have any questions, just let us know. When you run the report, again, it should break down the transactional information and give you data that we get from our gateway. Because the transactions in my database are fake, that's why we're not getting really a response from them. So when I run the report, I don't see very much. But again, in your database, you should, as long as you have Constellation Payments. Below that is check deposits. So for some of our camps who accept checks, you have the ability to create a PDF copy of when you are bringing checks to the bank. So when you come in here, it's first going to list all of your undeposited checks. It does break it down on a per category basis. So even though the check number matches, again, you might notice that it's a part of multiple line items. That's because, like I said, it breaks it down into different categories. If I am bringing these checks to the bank, I want to create a new check deposit. What this does is it basically creates a PDF hard copy record of when I brought those checks to the bank. That way, if I see a deposit in my bank for 1895, I know that it's actually a breakdown of these checks. Right? So it's just, again, reconciling the deposits that you have in the bank for non electronic payment methods. So not every camp accepts checks, so this might not be valid for everyone, but it is something to consider. And again, it's just kind of double checking deposit amounts that you have. The last report here under reconciliation is deleted transactions. This will do exactly what it sounds like. It allows you to search your database based on transactions that have been deleted off of family profiles. So you can search by transaction type and by the deletion date. And then when you run the report, it will show you every single transaction that has been deleted. It will also show you the original transaction date, the date and time at which it was deleted, and the person who deleted it. It'll also show the reason for the deletion here on the right-hand side. Again, you don't have the ability to re-add the transaction or anything like that. It's just, again, more of a record of every occurrence of a deletion. I find a lot of camps will use this also to double check that only authorized administrators are deleting transactions, just to make sure that only certain people are doing it. So the last section is payment gateway reports. So this section works regardless of what payment gateway you have. So whether it's Constellation or authorized.net. The first report is the credit card transactions. So when you click on this, this is a record of all of your successful credit card transactions processed in your database. Again, you can search by year, by card type, by transaction range, and by date range. When you run the report, again, it'll just show you every occurrence of a successful transaction according to the criteria above. So it'll have all the transactional details, including the payment gateway ID, which again is that unique number which we can verify with the gateway. The next report is almost the exact opposite. It is credit card declines. So this is going to be a record of every unsuccessful credit card transaction in your database. So you can search by card type, by transaction range, and by date range. And when you run the report, it will just break down again every occurrence of a decline. So it will break down which card was declined, the reason for the decline, and if it got far enough, it will also include the payment gateway ID. Again, you can have it set so that parents are automatically notified anytime they are declined. Great. And then the last report is expired credit cards. This allows you to search your database for any credit cards that are already expired or are about to expire. So you can search by card type, by expiration month and year, and then you can search for just primary cards, or you can search for every card that exists within your database. So when you run this report, again, it's just going to break down every family that has an expired or about to expire credit card, depending on the expiration month and year that you choose. From this report, you can double click on the envelope icon here just above the results in order to, again, send the parents a reminder that they can update their credit card information through the parent dashboard. Yep. Reports, very honestly, do take a little bit of practice. So if you are, what I mean by that is you may not always know the perfect report to use, and you may not use any of these reports for several months, until you start actually collecting money from parents and things like that. So if you ever have any questions, you can always come back to support at any time. Right now, any questions on reports before I move on to financial settings, which is the last thing that we're going to go over today? All right, so last thing that we're going to go over today is financial settings. In order to get there, I want to click Admin here in the top navigation bar. And then under Campers, you will see 4 sections that all start with the word financial. The first one is financial communication. So the first setting here is to have the ability to send an email to the billing email for when a credit card or checking account is approved. If you have this set to yes, what it does is it automatically sends the parents a honestly very generic email letting them know that their credit card transaction was approved. The hard-coded message in that email is a credit card transaction for X dollar amount has been successfully charged to the credit card type, so Visa, MasterCard, whatever, ending in the last 4 digits of the card. So that very brief and general sentence is hard-coded into the email. If you wanted to include any additional language, then you would want to type it here where it says additional text to include and approved transaction emails. So anything that you type here, you can customize using the WYSIWYG, which I'm sure you've seen before. And again, it'll be below that generic hard-coded message, just confirming that their transaction was successful. As I scroll down, you'll see the ability to send an email to the billing email for when a credit card or checking account transaction is declined. So I would say that not every one of our camps has the approved message set to yes. Some people find it redundant, but almost every single one of our camps that accepts payments has the declined email set to yes. So again, technically speaking, it'll be a very generic message. Unfortunately, a credit card transaction for this dollar amount was declined on this credit card ending in these 4 digits. So if you wanted to spice it up and add additional language, you can do so again by typing it here in this box. What we tend to find is that most camps, again, will add contact information for a specific financial person at their camp. So maybe the name, phone number, and email address of someone they can contact to make sure that their payment is received as soon as possible. As I scroll down, you can add additional text to appear at the bottom of invoices above the payment coupon. So anything that you type here in this first box will only affect non-auto pay families. As I scroll down, you can add custom text to display on all statements and display on all invoices. So regardless of whether they're auto pay or non-auto pay, this will display to every family on all their invoices or all their statements. The most common examples that we find is the tax ID number, especially on statements. We find that quite a bit. Or again, the contact information for a specific financial person at their camp. So you also have the ability to show session dates of campers on all statements and on all invoices. I would actually say that most camps have both of these set to yes, just because most parents like to see the dates of the sessions that their camper is attending. So any changes that you make sure you click Save Changes here on the far bottom right-hand side before navigating away from the page. The next section here on the left-hand side is Financial Parent Dashboard. This page will allow you to determine what parents can and cannot do through the parent dashboard in relation to their financial info. So the first thing is that you can customize the homepage of the financial tab of the parent dashboard. Below that, you can allow parents to view their balance as well as download any current statements on their own. Both of those default to yes. You can allow parents to view, add, or edit their credit card / checking account information through the parent dashboard. Again, all 3 of those default to yes. Below that, you can allow parents to make payments on the parent dashboard against their balance or against any open invoices. Most camps have both of these set to yes. Very rarely will I see it be set to no, maybe in rare scenarios, but most of the time, most camps have both of these set to yes because they want to give parents as many opportunities to submit payments and give them money as often as possible. So if a parent does submit a payment through the parent dashboard, they will be presented with this in-browser confirmation message, letting them know that their payment was successful. Again, you can spice up that message any way that you like by typing your message here using the WYSIWYG toolbar. On the very bottom, you can allow parents to set their own invoice email preferences. So again, they can choose which one of them is receiving the bill. And then you can also allow parents to view their payment schedule dates as well as download any generated invoices. So again, both of those default to yes. Right. And again, any changes made, make sure you click Save Changes here on the far bottom right-hand side. The next section is financial payment methods. So This section will typically look different in your database depending on what payment methods you are allowed to process in your database. So, but it will display every electronic form of payment that you are able to process. Again, if there are some here that listed in my database that you don't see in yours, that's totally normal. If you want to expand your electronic payment method, you would just need to contact your gateway and submit the proper paperwork. So in general, Visa, MasterCard, and Discover are actually lumped together. So if you're approved for one, you can process all three. American Express is separate paperwork on its own, and then e-checks or ACH payments are also separate paperwork that you would need to submit. So, like I said, some camps will have all of them. Some you might want to expand by contacting your payment gateway. When it says yes, it means that that payment method is available to parents. If it's set to no, it means that it is strictly for internal use or admin only use. Honestly, I don't know why you would want to have something set to no if you don't want to. I mean, if you accept that payment method, you may as well allow parents to add it to their profile. So below the electronic payment methods, you'll see the ability to allow the check payment method. You only have the ability to allow the check payment method, or you only have the ability to display it to parents if you are in manual processing mode. If you are in automatic mode, you can only have electronic payments displayed to parents. So keep that in mind. If you are in manual mode and you want them to be able to choose check as a valid payment method, then you would just want to switch this to yes. And when you do that, you can also include payment instructions. Most camps will include who to make the check out to, where to send the check, and maybe in the olden days before COVID would be like office hours of when they can drop the check off in person. So again, I do recommend including at least some basic instructions if you have the check method set to yes. Below that is where you can add custom payment methods. So by far, the most common custom payment method is cash. Again, maybe not so much anymore with people not being able to come into the office, but cash, I would still say, is by far the most common payment method. Any custom payment methods that you create will be considered also non-electronic by nature. So you do have the ability to display custom payment methods to parents, but only if you are in manual processing mode. Right? Most of the time I find that most custom payment methods are for internal use only. And I've seen a wide variety of things. Although cash is, again, most popular, I've also seen wire transfer, money order, PayPal, scholarship, a bunch of different things. So completely up to you and your team. Again, if you do display it during enrollment while you're in manual mode, I do recommend including instructions just so that parents are made aware of what they should do if they choose that method. Once you create a payment method, if you double click on the pencil icon, you can edit those settings at any time, just so you know. And then finally, we have financial settings. So the first financial setting is to allow partial credit card refunds. Again, most camps have this set to yes, because most of the time you do want to refund partial amounts, especially if you have non-refundable deposits and things like that. Below that, you can combine electronic payments on statements. So again, this will just ensure that no matter how many categories a payment is spread across, it will always appear as a single row or line item on parents' financial statements. Most camps have this set to yes because most parents, very honestly, don't care what category their payment is spread across. They just want, they want to know that if they sent you $250, $250 is listed on their statement. So below that is where you can allow parents to pay more than the deposit amount when enrolling. This setting is almost always set to yes because it allows the parent to choose to pay in full at the time of enrollment. And most camps really, really like parents who pay in full at the time of enrollment because it avoids having to chase them down or, put them on a payment schedule and things like that. So typically I find that most camps do want to allow parents to pay more than the deposit if they want to. Below that is where, very honestly, this setting is a little confusing, but basically it just says if there are no payment schedules active, so either all of the dates are passed or the payment schedule is for internal use only, then you can allow parents to only pay the deposit amount when going through enrollment. Most camps keep this at no because if you only allow them to pay a deposit, even though your payment schedules have finished or they're not active, then the family's remaining balance is not on a payment schedule. And therefore, it's completely up to administrators to kind of hunt down that family and make sure that they pay the remaining balance. So it's not a very attractive offer for most admins to have to, again, chase down families who are not on a payment schedule. So most camps keep this to no. And again, that's what also allows the default settings to be where once the last date of a payment schedule passes, then enrollment will be pay in full. Right. So if that's how you want to keep it, make sure this is set to no. If you ever have any questions on this setting, just contact support and we're happy to help you out. Below that is an in-browser message that displays to parents on the checkout page if they choose an enrollment option that their camper is being waitlisted for. The reason why we have this is because when a camper is being waitlisted, typically they still need to choose a payment method or they need to choose payment options. This is just ensuring them that they will not be charged anything unless their camper is officially approved. So they're moved from the waitlist to being actually enrolled. So just an in-browser message letting them know that while they're adding payment info, they won't actually be charged anything until they're approved. And again, you can spice up that language any way that you like. As I scroll down, you can decide whether you want to stack enrollment discounts and coupon codes. So you may not have coupon codes. That's fine. Not every camp does. Same thing with discounts. You may not have any discounts. What this setting does is it just says that parents can receive both at the time of enrollment, both a discount and a coupon code if they have it. If this is set to yes, then a third setting pops up where you can also choose whether the coupon code is applied before the discount or vice versa, the discount is applied before the coupon code. Again, just personal preferences dealing with discounts and codes, which of course not every camp will have. If you do have coupon codes, you can also decide whether they will be applied towards the total balance, so the camper's tuition plus any enrollment extras, or just the tuition plan. So again, you can change that setting at any time. And then the final setting that we have is the ability to require parents to pay in full for enrollment extras purchased after checkout. So for enrollment extras tied to bundles, you do have the ability to make them available after parents finish the enrollment process. So let's say it's an aftercare and they don't add aftercare when they do their initial checkout, then maybe a couple weeks later they realize they need it. You can make it so that enrollment extras are available to purchase after they finish their enrollment process. Even if after the camper is already approved, they can still add additional enrollment extras. What this setting does is it says that if they do add enrollment extras after their initial checkout, those enrollment extras will be considered pay in full at the time that they are adding them. So it's a very specific setting. Again, might not apply to every single camp, but again, most camps, if they do offer extras to be purchased after the initial checkout, they typically have this set to yes. That way, again, they're not chasing down families who might add aftercare or merchandise after the fact. Right? Again, if you make any changes, make sure you click Save Changes here on the far bottom right-hand side. So that actually wraps up our financial training. Like I said, it's a little dense. There's a lot of stuff to cover. But any questions on anything that I covered today before I end the webinar?